Hello, traveler. Before we dive into today's topic, there is a simple truth that needs to be acknowledged. The truth that living with someone who feels everything at maximum volume can be incredibly exhausting. It is not easy navigating between love, fear, guilt, and exhaustion, and sometimes all of that in the same day, sometimes all within the same hour. And that brings us to today's lesson. We're going to offer you clarity, language, and tools that transform chaos into comprehension, and that transform burnout into safer choices. Everything based on the book, Stop Walking on Eggshells, by Randy Kreger and Paul Mason. So let's learn how to protect your emotional health and your own individuality while navigating paths that many people face in silence. Let's go. To start with, it is important to understand that life alongside someone with extreme emotional instability feels like living inside a pressure cooker. It is accumulated tension, unpredictable triggers, explosions that seem disproportionate to the situations that cause them. It is an environment where you never know when the valve will release, when the next eruption will happen. Because the person with borderline personality disorder generally lives with intense emotions and strong reactions, for those who live with them, daily life becomes constant surveillance. This generates chronic anxiety, guilt, the sensation of walking on eggshells constantly, and physical exhaustion manifesting as insomnia, changes in appetite, and profound fatigue that doesn't go away with rest. Okay, but how do you get out of this? Well, a classic mistake is trying to fix the other person. We try to fix the person with borderline personality disorder by changing only our own behavior, which leads nowhere productive. So, according to the authors, what is necessary is purposeful change. And the purpose cannot be to control the other person. It has to be to take care of yourself. And how do you do that? Look, the motivation behind the change makes all the difference. If you change only to calm the other person down, you are maintaining a game of emotional power that exhausts you, that drains you completely. But if you change to preserve your health, your autonomy, and the safety of the relationship, then the change is authentic and sustainable. Let's look at a practical example. You receive an aggressive message on your phone. Okay, instead of responding in the heat of the moment, you use a button of self-containment. In other words, instead of reacting impulsively, you breathe. You wait a few minutes for the anger to pass or diminish, and you respond with something like, "Look, I understand you are upset, but I am only going to talk about this with you at another time." And if the aggressive behavior repeats, you turn off your phone for a certain number of hours. See, the point here isn't to make the other person feel better. It is to preserve your peace and close the gaps that allow the other person to keep invading your day. This type of invasion needs to have consequences, clear and consistent ones. Another interesting technique is rewriting automatic scripts. And what is this? Very simple. Identify automatic phrases, things you always say to relieve tension. Identify these phrases and replace them with alternative phrases, and training out loud in front of a mirror increases your communicative competence. For example, you can practice a ready response for insults. Something like this: "This isn't about justifying yourself or smoothing things over. It is about setting boundaries. You are not asking anything from the person. You are explaining how things need to be to preserve safety, well-being, and dignity for both of you." So imposing limits isn't punishment. It is establishing predictability and safety. And for people sensitive to rejection, like those with BPD, acting within clear and predictable limits reduces uncertainty. In other words, it is better for them too, even if initially this causes some confrontation. But here is the thing. Before acting, you need to clearly diagnose your situation. That means understanding your own feelings, the other person's patterns, the resources you have available, and what is possible to change or not. So start by doing an emotional and factual inventory. You should list how you feel: tired, anxious, afraid. List also what happens, what the complicated behaviors are, and the situations in which these behaviors occur. List what you've already tried as a solution that didn't work. Making this list reduces confusion and helps you perceive that crises are indeed things that can be managed, that can be navigated. But how do I make these lists? A practical tool is journaling. Use a journal for 2 weeks to note episodes, triggers your reaction and the other person's reaction. Soon you'll see the patterns emerging clearly and see to understand your situation well. It is fundamental to separate discomfort from danger. Some behaviors are unpleasant, they're uncomfortable, but others are dangerous. Things like physical violence, sexual abuse, manipulative financial pressure, coherent threats of suicide, attempts to isolate you from your family and friends. These things are dangerous. And taking care of yourself includes recognizing when a relationship is dangerously toxic. So seek individual therapy or support groups, and also seek legal consultation if necessary. This social and professional support gives you perspective and gives you tools, because understanding your situation is like turning on a light in a dark room. Suddenly you see where you stumble, you see what is safe, and you see what needs to be changed immediately. There is one more thing. Talking about what you need. This is a central act when there is emotional instability on the other end, and there are practical steps for negotiating and implementing boundaries without losing empathy, and also for maintaining consistency, even in the face of the emotional pressure the other person might try to exert. So prepare the message. Prepare what to say and how to say it. Describe the behaviors you no longer want to tolerate without judgments or accusations. Say how they affect you, how they make you feel. State the boundary or need clearly. Make it clear what the person can no longer do or what need of yours you are no longer going to put aside. Finally, indicate what the consequence will be if the boundary isn't respected. Say something more or less like this. When you do A, I feel B. I am not going to accept this anymore, nor am I going to give up this need here. If your behavior continues, I am going to do X. But won't this make everything worse? Well, here is where empathetic communication needs to come into play. You should speak in a way that validates the other person's feeling, but without agreeing with what they do. This distinction is what allows you to maintain connection without giving up boundaries. For example, after an anger explosion from the person with BPD, you can say, "Look, I understand that you feel abandoned. I know this is difficult for you, but I am not going to accept insults because of it. And it is important not to back down, because the effectiveness of boundaries depends on consistent application. A consequence that is not applied weakens the boundary. So if the consequence is, I am going to leave the room for 20 minutes, it needs to actually happen as soon as the boundary is violated, without thinking twice and without hesitation. Finally, it is important to create a safety plan that is right, a detailed safety plan that functions like an action manual when emotions reach dangerous levels. This plan is important both for preventing and for responding to certain crises like suicide threats, violent behaviors, or self-harm. And what is this safety plan? It is a pre-established set of concrete steps to use when a situation reaches a risk point. This plan should include contacts, immediate actions, and safe places where you can go. Because here is the thing. A crisis situation eliminates our capacity to reason logically, so having a ready plan avoids decisions being made in the heat of the moment. And what are the essential components of this plan? Well, first, warning signs, the thoughts, words, or behaviors that indicate the person is escalating. Then, emergency contacts, numbers for mental health services, friends, family members, and police. A list of immediate actions, a list of things you or the emergency contact can realistically do in the first 30 to 60 minutes of a crisis situation. It is also important to have a safe location, a place to go if you need to leave home. Also have the name and contact of the person's therapist, if they have one. The safety plan should also include what needs to be done regarding children or pets. In case you need to leave home quickly, create your plan calmly in a neutral moment, not during a crisis. At the end of the day, the book reminds us of something essential. You don't need to walk through this intensely emotional territory without a map and without support. When you learn to recognize patterns, to establish boundaries, and to create a safety plan, you recover parts of yourself that perhaps you've left along the way. Living with someone who feels everything in extreme ways isn't simple, but with information and the right tools, it stops being chaos without exit and transforms into a journey of conscious choices, of self-care, and of protecting your own emotional health. You deserve this clarity, this strength, and this breathing room. And remember, everything has limits. In certain cases, after many things have already been tried, the only realistic solution will indeed be distance, separation. Stay safe, traveler. I'll see you on our next journey.